Meniscus repair on Wednesday. It's going well, but it's a little swollen after all this morning. So, there we go. I think I can bend it. Yep, there we go. What? No, Jeff Potts, if you'd kneel, right? Nah, I think I'll be all right. Picture a little girl. I'm going to call her Dabney. Dabney gets bundled up to go play in the snow. The next day, she bundles up again. Mom helps her bundle up, and she goes to play in the snow. Every time Dabney puts on her knit hat, her mom opens the door for her to go play outside. So Dabney begins to surmise the hat has the power. She has the power to control Mommy. She can get Mommy to open the door if she'll put on her hat. And the first time it works. She puts on her hat. Mommy says, "Do you want to go outside and play?" She says, bundles her up, lets her go outside and play in the snow. But the second time it doesn't work. Second time it doesn't work, and there's confusion and frustration and crying. Dabney actually has no control. And yet I wonder, how often do we follow the illusion that we have control? That maybe, do we control God in some ways? Do we control God by certain actions, certain words? When we pray, Lord, I need this. Lord, I need you to do that. Lord, I need you to do this. Lord, I need you to do that. In Jesus' name. And somehow we control God? The rules of the world weren't written by us, were they? A friend of mine wrote a book called The World According to Me, about the illusions of our control. And the more I think about it, the more I'm almost embarrassed that, boy, I probably follow that more than I think I do, than I'd like to admit. The present moment is really all we control. I mean, the past is, well, it's past. And when we tell the story of our lives, we're a little bit selective. Did you ever notice that? That we're following a book called the 5 Questions of Christmas, and he uses this illustration. I really like the imagery here. He says, we're like the owner of an historical residence. We know there are secret nooks we keep to ourselves, messy closets we conceal from others, and dark basement areas no one dares to enter. We just skip those parts of the story. The future, however, is life's great undiscovered country. We want to control that future. And there's nothing wrong with making plans. Just make sure that when you're telling somebody your plans, you do it this way. My plans, listen to God laugh, are this. Make sure you pause. Because if you want to hear God laugh, just tell him what your plans are. There are too many variables, too many factors that will impact our plans. But still, we mark our calendars, we seek to shape our future, we make decisions. Well, of course we do, we have to. But we ought not to be under the illusion that we control it. For instance, when a baby is born, we set aside our pessimism for a while and dream, and a newborn is full of potential and promise, and fresh and new and clean. Well, this long-awaited day finally happened with Elizabeth and Zachariah. Here's the story. When it was time for Elizabeth to have her baby, she gave birth to a son. Her neighbors and relatives heard that the Lord had shown her great mercy, and they shared her joy. On the 8th day, they came to circumcise the child, and they were going to name him after his father Zechariah. But his mother spoke up and said, "No, he is to be called John." They said to her, "There's no one among your relatives who has that name." And they made signs to his father to find out what he would like to name the child. As if he had a say. He asked for a writing tablet, and to everyone's astonishment, he wrote, "His name is John." And immediately his mouth was opened and his tongue set free, and he began to speak, praising God. All the neighbors were filled with awe, and throughout the hill country of Judea, people were talking about all these things. Everyone who heard this wondered about it, saying, "What then is this child going to be?" For the Lord's hand was with him. What does the future hold? What's the future going to be like? I mean, there was this strangeness to John's birth. Born to two people well beyond their childbearing years. There was a strangeness to his name, John. It wasn't a family name. Now, we named our son John, but my grandfather was named John. I have an uncle named John. It was a family name. He also happens to be the only boy of 13 girls with the last name of Raker. No pressure. But this birth of John the Baptist was strange and different. What will happen to this new life? What will he become? What future is yet to be discovered? How will this baby's destiny unfold? What will I become? What will you become? How we answer that determines whether we find the happiness and satisfaction in life that we seek. Who am I? What does God want from me? Some people just charge ahead with their plans and don't consider what God might want. Their pursuits, their pleasures, their pride all crowd out every other consideration, even people. They cheat and they lie to get ahead at work. They commit adultery and recklessly abandon their families. Their bright light of achievement, their wealth, their titles outshine the damage other people suffer in their wake. Some people put themselves last on the to-do list. It seems noble. They care for others first, but it usually leads to personal demise because they end up being no good to anyone because they were no good to themselves. Self-care is not selfish. It's good to put yourself first sometimes. It's good because if you're not good for anyone else. It's a difficult and important lesson to learn in life. But somewhere between that extreme of selfishness and that selflessness that goes too far is the stewardship of our personal potential. What does it look like? We get to create the masterpiece. The future is more than a moment that has yet to arrive. It's the life that waits for us, and we get to do something with it. What will we do? What will we become? What will this child become? What will you become? John's future was heralded by his father, Zechariah. Luke chapter 1. "And you, my child, will be called a prophet of the Most High, and you will go on before the Lord to prepare the way for him, to give his people the knowledge of salvation through the forgiveness of their sins, because of the tender mercy of our God, by which the rising sun will come to us from heaven." Isn't that a great image? "To shine on those living in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the path of peace." Notice that. In the shadow of death. Not going to save us from it, but while we're in it. "And the child grew and became strong in spirit, and he lived in the wilderness until he appeared publicly to Israel." A couple of things we can draw from that. First of all, the future is ours to make. It's ours. I mean, life has boundaries, but really, we create more boundaries than God does, I think. We create boxes where God has no boxes. There's far more potential than I think we sometimes allow ourselves to live into. Let me show you a little brain game. Some of you have probably seen this and done this before. You can draw it out and draw the 9 dots on your page if you'd like to, and try it for a moment. The goal is to connect all 9 dots with 4 straight lines. Once you start drawing, you can't lift your pencil from the paper. 4 lines, all straight, connect all 9 dots. So we'll give just a moment. I do this with various groups, and it's just a way to help them go like, okay, we need to break out of our box. We need to think outside. We need to believe that there are possibilities that go beyond what I think might already exist. There's potential. There's possibility. Anybody got it yet? Anybody seen it and they can't remember how to do it? That's often what it is. It's like, oh, I know I've done this. I know I've seen this. So here's the solution. You got to go outside the box. And what all of our brains do is they automatically put a box in there. I didn't say there was a box. But our brains said, oh, I need to stay within those imaginary lines that aren't really there. Our brains just automatically draw it. This is as far as I can go. I can go no further. There are no other possibilities. There are no other options. Really? Oh, I think there are. And they're hard to see. I mean, they're hard for us to see. We need people to help us see them. So I'm still getting some furrowed brows going, are you allowed to do that? Are you allowed to go outside those lines? There are no lines. There's no box. Fear creates those lines, those boxes. Lack of confidence creates them. Some people grew up in a home where they were told, you're no good. And so there's a box created. What about how you view failure? When you fail at something, does it mean you're a failure? Or you just failed at that thing? There's a big difference, and depends on how quickly we draw the boxes and the lines. Here's another thing I learned from Zechariah's story about John, is we control how we respond to what happens to us. We control it. There's a formula in business and sports leadership these days that just has 3 letters. E plus R equals O. Anybody know what that stands for? There's an event, there's a response, and that leads to the outcome. Oh, is it in the notes? See what I put in the notes next time. See if you all pay attention to the notes, that's why. So, if things happen to us, and we have a choice, it's our response, and it changes the outcome to it. We don't get to control most of the stuff that happens to us, do we? I mean, sure, we can put things on the calendar, we can do this, we can do that, and then somebody runs a red light and destroys our car. You know? One of my favorite mottos lately is, you can succeed or learn. Failure is not an option. I like that. It's our response that determines whether or not we learn and grow. Here's a third thing I learned. Our possibilities are limited by cause and effect. Our decisions really do matter, in other words. Sometimes the decisions of others affect our lives. You ever have that happen? Somebody else makes a decision and you're like, oh, okay, that's the reality we're going to deal with now. And sometimes it's not what we want. The results of each of our choices are like that rock we drop in the pond and the ripples, right? The ripples just go and go and go until they reach the furthest shores. Our decisions really do matter. But I also learned that the future doesn't exist yet. I'm not boxed in. Our future is not predetermined. Now, we're not going to go down this rabbit hole too far, but the question is often asked, what does God know about the future? If God knows everything about the future, including the choices I'm going to make, does that mean I have a choice? And you can begin asking all these crazy questions. God does know what the future holds for us. And he does know the choices we're going to make, not because he has predetermined them, but because God's not limited by time. God is both here today and already there tomorrow at the same time. God is limitless in that sense. So he does know because he's already there looking back. But yet we still have a choice, and we could choose his path. Because he has a path for us. He has a choice he would want us to make. And you know what? Even when we choose plan B instead of God's plan A, how many times has that happened? God has the ability to turn our plan B choice into a new plan A. I don't know how he does it, but he's a master at it, if we'll let him. Proverbs 16:9 says, in his heart man plans his course, but the Lord establishes his steps. God wants us to choose, but he wants us to choose his way. And he'll bound us in. He'll help us. He'll put guardrails up. He'll keep us from going too far left or too far right. Later on in John's ministry, we read this in the Gospel of John, chapter 3, not written by John the Baptist. An argument developed between some of John the Baptist's disciples and a certain Jew over the matter of ceremonial washing. They came to John and said to him, Rabbi, the man who was with you on the other side of the Jordan, the one you testified about, referring to Jesus, look, he is baptizing and everyone is going to him. To this John replied, a person can receive only what is given them from heaven. You yourselves can testify that I said I am not the Messiah, but I am sent ahead of him. The bride belongs to the bridegroom. The friend who attends the bridegroom waits and listens for him and is full of joy when he hears the bridegroom's voice. That joy is mine, and it is now complete. He must become greater. I must become less. There's 5 pretty simple things that John used to shape his future. They come right out of what he just said. Let's look at it. First of all, John displayed divine dependence. No one can receive anything except what has been given from heaven. Our future is in the hands of God, on whom ought we to be dependent? And how can we display that? We have the life that we have, and not somebody else's. We were born who we are, not someone else. So, okay, God, this is who I am. Now what? God, this is who I am, and these are some of the choices I made. Now what? Divine dependence. Not so messed up that God doesn't know where we are, not so distant or lost that we can't be found, And we don't have to clean ourselves up before we say, okay, God, what's next? Secondly, John displayed a distinct identity. Remember, he said, you yourselves are my witnesses that I said I am not the Messiah, but I have been sent ahead of him. I am me. I'm not somebody else. Did you ever have the thought, what if I would have been born and grown up in Southern California, not Ohio? I've thought about that. Would have swum outside every day. Be different, wouldn't it? But I'm not there. And often, there are some people who often think about what could have been or what they would like it to be, and they miss what is. John was very clear about nobody else like me. This is who I am. Now let's create what I've got, what's there. John displayed undeniable purpose. Number 3, John knew his place. He says he was friend of the bridegroom. The bridegroom being Christ. He's just the friend, waiting. Do you know your purpose? Do you know that God has created you for a purpose? Do you know what that purpose is? It's far less complicated than we make it out to be. I've shared with you before, and you may remember, if you've been here for a while, that my very deep theological, scientific way of discovering God's will is 2 words. Pay attention. Just pay attention and take account of who do I know? What do I know? Where have I been? What experiences have I had? How does God want to use this in me? This